All right. So now we're going to go back to group for a minute, group process, because this is what we're going to experience together. So one voice reads a poem, and then you can make a little chiming sound. That's a terrible chiming sound. I forgot to bring my chime. Anyway, if you have a chime, use it. I have a little round metal singing bowl that I just strike lightly, and it makes a little ding. And then if there's time, invite a second member of the family or the person you're doing spiritual direction with or pastoral counseling with, invite them to read the poem. This is how Stevens ministers use it. I've had the privilege of doing a couple of workshops / retreat days for Stevens ministers, and they've written to me afterwards saying that they use the mindful reading process just as I described it, and it almost invariably has a good impact. Then you give another minute of silence. So there's always the reading, then silence to absorb, then the reading, then silence to absorb or to let rise up. And then you might do the chime again. And then you, the facilitator or the spiritual director or pastoral counselor, chaplain, extend the invitation to speak a significant words or phrases out loud, or if it's a circle, as we are, into the circle. And then there's a small silence again, so that people can really listen to those. And then you just say, so what do you think? Or I invite you now to share, or whatever seems right. Okay. So in a minute, or a few minutes, I'm going to come back to these questions. Can you think of some uses for poems in a group setting? Grief groups, how could healthcare professionals use them? Funeral directors are using a lot of poetry in celebrations of life. And so here's the poem Up and Down, and this is in the book by Beverly Rollwagon. I don't know anything for sure unless I look it up. Sometimes I can figure things out if I write them down. So it's up and down all day long. It's a good life, better than back and forth or in and out, which I find constraining. I have up and down in balance, and with my mother's death, have discovered the true meaning of before and after. All right, so I'm not sure our participants can unmute themselves. Is that right, Charlie?
That's right. They're not able to.
So right. we're gonna show them what it would be like. All right.
Okay.
So what I would say to a group is, I invite you, jot this down if you want to try it, because I've honed my way of doing it too. So I invite you to hold the silence while we speak words or phrases into our circle. So even if there's only 2 people or 3, it can still be our circle. Obviously, it's the whole family. If you're leading a group, it's easy to see it's our circle. And then there's usually a little silence. And then if nobody says anything, that's okay, because we're comfortable with silence. We understand ministry. Then I might just model for them and say, like one of my favorite lines in here is always, I don't know anything. Then there would be quiet. Then Charlie, can I impose on you to speak one?
Sure. The up and down really caught me, and then near the end, my mother's death.
Okay, thank you. And then we're not discussing it yet. So okay. Charlie didn't, but if it looked like he was going to start talking about it, I would give him the quick hand signal and say, in a moment, we'll discuss it. Right now, we're just holding the silence while we speak a word or phrase. And when we do that, everybody gets it. Sometimes you just remind one time and then everybody gets it. So then someone else might say, it's a good life. Someone else around the circle might say, constraining. Charlie, do you have another one you might throw out?
Before and after.
Okay. Mm-hmm. In balance often gets mentioned when I do this poem with somebody. So you see how that goes. Depending on the size of the group, it can last as long as 5 minutes, which is fine, because this is another way for the words of the poem to fall on our ears in different voices. And then when I think people are kind of finished with that, I might ring a chime again, or I'll just say, so what do you think? So let's go back to the questions that I put up before on the PowerPoint. Imagine that, you are using this poem with someone, or you are with a chaplain who has just read it to you. can you think just for a moment with me? I'll give you some ideas, but I'd like you to think of your own first. And if you wish to, you can write them in the chat box, because when we're in a minute, I'll ask Charlie and Dan, who's also monitoring chat boxes on YouTube, if anyone had anything to say. All right. But like, so we just heard up and down twice. We've spoken significant words or phrases into the circle. And now I'm inviting you to say, you know, what comes up in you when you hear this poem? Remember, not what it means, but maybe what does it mean to you? What do you think might happen in a grief group if you said something like that? If you want to respond, put something in the chat box and we'll read your responses. Otherwise, I'll give you some samples. Or if you're a healthcare professional and you're working with someone whose loved one is in hospice, and they've just been confiding to you that they feel like they're losing their mind because there's so much to do, and they have grief brain themselves, so it's very hard to concentrate. And they've, you know, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I want to do everything I can for my mother, and I'm still raising kids. Can you see how this could be one of the poems that you would pull out of the book or pull out of the folder and say, you know, you're not the first person who has felt like this. Now, some of you might say, oh, I couldn't use a poem that says, you know, since my mother's death, I've learned the meaning of before and after with somebody whose mother hasn't died yet. I couldn't use that. But actually, you as a minister are probably in a pretty good position to see whether or not the person realizes that this person is going to die. Like, is the person, the family member who you're doing ministry with, have they accepted that this is a terminal illness? And if they have, using that poem is giving them permission to say out loud, I wake up every night upset because I know my mother has very limited time left. You might be the first person they could say that to.